Welcome to 10 Questions with NBC10 Boston. I'm Kwani Lunis. And to steal a line or borrow one from David Letterman, my next guest really needs no introduction. Jackie MacMullan has not only been a pioneer of women in sports journalism, I would say overall just setting a standard for what journalism really looks like. So Jackie MacMullan, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Kwani. Anytime.
How has your day been?
Well, it's early, but I've already been to the post office because that's what you have to do this time of year. I actually got there at 7:45 and there was a line 10 people on because it opens at 8. But I have stuff to do. It's good.
Staying busy. I like to hear that.
You bet.
But rewinding a little bit to the pandemic and you being a journalist during that time, what adaptations have you had to make during that time?
Yeah, I think it's been one of the most challenging years for all of us because I make my living sitting down with people in a room and talking with them and getting to know them and trying to get them to relax and be comfortable and tell me things they don't tell anybody else. And it's pretty hard to do over a Zoom call. So we've had to get creative. It hasn't always been easy. I think it's helped a little bit just because you've developed, relationships through the years. So rather than relying on the scrum calls, you can get people on your own. We came up with this idea during the pandemic to do something called Outside the Bubble. So I interviewed people who were not in the bubble for various reasons. Trevor Ariza, because he was in a custody battle with his son. And if he went into the bubble, he was going to lose custody of his son. So he was one of the ones I did. I did one with the owner of the Milwaukee Bucks, Mark Lazary, watching his team from the he would go in and out of the outer portion of the bubble, but not inside the bubble. Did one with Danny H, because as you know, his physicians, his cardiologist had advised that he didn't go because of the cardiac issues he's had. So we just tried to frame it in a different way. I mean, we had Nick Nurse was with us for the first game of the finals because, as you recall, or actually, no, I'm sorry, the final game of the finals because, with that Laker win, they were no longer the champions, the Raptors. So we tried to get creative.
And that goes to show, to your point, the fact that human interaction is very important. But thankfully, you've built your relationships with people over the years, and that has definitely helped you propel during this time.
It has, but it's still not quite the same. For instance, I'm doing a call later today with Ben Simmons, who I've gotten to know pretty well. Did a long profile on Ben last year. But he's someone that you definitely need to be in a room with to get him to relax. So I'm not really sure how it's going to go today because I'm going to be on a phone call with him, and that's not quite the same thing.
How have you been practicing? Well, not practicing, but how have you figured out ways to help people open up virtually?
I don't know. I just try to still shoot from the hip. That's always I just ask direct questions. I think direct questions, it's journalism 101. You don't ask a question that can be answered yes or no, and I don't do a lot of small talk because I think on a Zoom call, it feels like we're all on the clock when we do that. Yeah. So I'm careful not to, maybe in a setting, if I was doing a sit down interview, I would spend a little more time on that, but I kind of just get right to it because it feels like we're all on too many Zoom calls. So when you're on one, the time is valuable.
We're definitely all zoomed out. I do want to rewind a little bit for those who don't know your story. You started off in journalism just because you saw a need and you decided to fill it. For those who don't know your story, how did this man named John Wall, who's not in the NBA, play a role?
Oh, he was such a wonderful man. He was the sports editor of the Daily Transcript, which was a local paper. I grew up in Westwood, and I just used to get really frustrated. Westwood High School, the girls basketball team hadn't lost a league game in something like 17 years. Their coach was this incredible dynamo, Kathy Delaney Smith, who's still the Harvard coach, who filed a Title IX discrimination suit against our high school because things weren't equal between the boys and the girls. And because of her, we ended up going from wearing the field hockey kilts in games to rip off sweats with our names on the back. And we had all the same thing the guys had. So for me, it was very frustrating to then open up the newspaper and never read about any of the girls' teams. I just didn't understand it. The girls' teams were the ones that were going to the state championships and being successful. We had a swimmer in my high school. I just got a Christmas card from her yesterday, Sandy Friedel, who had broken all the school records, not just of the girls, but also of the boys. She had broken the boys' school records, and not a word had ever been written about her. So I used to stomp around the house and be really frustrated about it. And then my dad said to me one day, well, why don't you do something about it? I said, well, maybe I will. And he said, why don't you call the sports center? I said, I will, tomorrow. And he's like, no, I'm tired of listening to you. Do it now. So my dad stood there and I called him up and, of course, lost my nerve quite immediately and said, I'm just kind of wondering why you don't cover the girls. And he said, really small staff. I don't have anybody. You want to do it? And I said, oh, I'm 15. He said, yeah, if it stinks, I won't run it. So God bless John Wall. He did run it. I owe him a lot.
And you mentioned John Wall, even your dad pushing you. How has mentorship played a role over your career, throughout your career?
Oh, of course. I mean, the best thing in the world is to have someone that believes in you and is behind you. And that started for me in college. I had two amazing professors, Don Murray. I always call him the good cop and the bad cop. Don Murray, who was a two-time Pulitzer Prize winner, who's the one that got us to say, come on, you can do this. And all positive, reinforcement to get you out there and to write and to work for the school paper. And then Andy Merton, who was my magazine writing professor, just terrific guy and very talented writer himself. And, I'd write a, magazine piece for this class and he read lines through it, teach me something. So I always took what both of them said and tried to make a go of it. And then I got to the Globe. Are you kidding me? The holy trinity of the greatest. I had Will McDonough, who taught me how to be a reporter and to be tough and to stand up for myself. Bob Ryan, the greatest game story writer who ever lived. And Lee Montville, for my money, the best columnist that ever lived. So, unfortunately for me, when I got there, the only woman on our staff, Leslie Visser, had just gotten married and had moved to New York City. So there was no day-to-day female presence for me in the newsroom. So I relied very heavily on those guys, and they certainly didn't disappoint. They were tremendous to me, all of them.
And to follow up on that, all of the mentors you mentioned were men.
Right.
When you started in the industry, there was no blueprint necessarily for you as a woman in those locker rooms. How were you able to navigate that?
Well, a lot of women before me, including Leslie Visser, had gone into those locker rooms under very, very adversarial conditions. Susan Fornoff's another one that I think of. Michelle Himmer, I could list them all. Chris Brennan, they're all tremendous women who, made things a little easier for me. And then hopefully I did the same for the people that came after us. When I first started, Karen Garrigan was in town. She had been hired by the Herald. We're about the same age. She was covering hockey and I was covering basketball. So we did not cross paths much, but I had so much respect for the way she did her job. And so I always loved seeing Karen because she was the only one that I could think of that kind of had an idea of what I was going through. And of course, she's gone on to have a tremendous career. So when you saw women in the industry, Jeanette Howard was someone who worked for the Detroit Free Press. So when the Celtics and Pistons were having all those epic battles back in the 80s, she was covering the Pistons. And talk about a no-nonsense journalist. I mean, Bill Laimbeer, Isaiah, Rick Mahorn, they would start in with and she'd just say, no, none of that nonsense. Just answer my question. I mean, she was amazing. So I learned from every woman that I came across, and I think we found strength in one another.
And one quote I love from you in the New Yorker is the fact that you said, I'm not an entertainment writer, I'm a journalist. And I think despite being you're a woman or trying to trailblaze in this industry, you've always stayed true to your journalistic core. What exactly empowered you to make sure that you're going to get the truth no matter the cost?
Well, I mean, I worked at the Boston Globe for 19 years, and I worked first for Vince Doria and later for Don Squire, and then, later still for Joe Sullivan. And that was the standard. I mean, it wasn't even a question about currying favor with athletes and their agents. I mean, the agents play such a huge role now in coverage. And that wasn't true when I started. And you didn't worry about, I mean, one of the reasons I love Paul Pierce so much is very early in his career, I had to write some things that were very critical of him. He was young and immature and made some bad decisions early on in his career. and it was my job to chronicle them, and it was uncomfortable. And the one thing I always liked about Paul was, I remember one year in particular, I wrote something pretty tough about him, and tried to reach him, to talk to him about it. Couldn't reach him. And then it came back to the fall, and the Celtics had their annual Shamrock tip-off dinner, and I saw Paul there, and I thought, well, I better go talk to him before this event starts so he can give him a piece of my mind, because I really was very hard on him. And I went up to him and I said, hey, I've been trying to reach you. I wanted to give you a chance. I'm sure you're mad at me, and I just want to give you a chance to say whatever you want to say. And he looked at me and he said, you know what, Jackie, it's a new year. Let's start over. I always really respected that.
That's good to know that some people at least, I'm sure people have held grudges, but overall.
Oh yeah, plenty of them have, trust me.
How have you built that tough skin though?
Oh, I don't know. It's not fun. I mean, when you know that you've upset a player, no, I don't set out to do that, but I do set out, I have to be truthful in what I write. And it's hard when you like someone personally and care about somebody that you get to know over many, many years, and say, well, this person was, what they did, to be critical of them. I don't think human nature, there's some people that really revel in it and have made a career of it. I'm not one of them. But if you don't do that, Jerry Callahan, the former Herald writer and talk show host who I've known for many, many years, we've been good friends for a long time. I remember he told me once, I went on his radio show, and he said, and some people were very complimentary and some people were going at me. And he said to me, yeah, this is good. There's a lot of people today that aren't very happy with you. And he said, that means you're doing your job. And I think he's kind of right. If everybody loves you, you probably aren't following that journalistic, code.
That's a really good tip for, I think, journalists that are coming up, to understand that it's not all roses and fun.
Oh, no. Everyone's like, you have the best job. I'm like, you try having a 7 foot, 300-pound guy this far from your face telling you how much you stink, Exactly. It's not all that fun.
What would you say has been the biggest challenge over the decades of covering the NBA?
The NBA is really a great environment, to be honest. David Stern, when he was a commissioner, I had some problems very early on in my tenure in the NBA, and he just wouldn't stand for it. In fact, there was one player that was giving me a very, very hard time in the locker room. Again, for something I had written, I was in the locker room. I purposely went there when he was from a visiting team in Boston, coming to Boston. And I purposely went in there again to give him a chance to, and it was really, really volatile. And he was, almost threatening. And I never reported it or said anything about it, but I got a call the next day from Stern. What happened? I'm like, how did you know? He said, never mind. What happened? Tell me what happened. I told him. He said, you'll be getting a call in a few minutes with an apology. And he made the player call and apologize. So that was, David Stern took it all very seriously. So that was the climate within which I was operating. And again, remember, I'm covering these Celtics teams that have Bird, McHale, Parrish, Ainge, DJ. They were huge personalities, and they loved to make fun of us and to challenge us, but they also understood the job we had to do. And I never had any problems with any of them. They were so welcoming. I think their thought was, you either know the game or you don't. You either work hard or you don't. If you don't, we're not going to have much use for you. If you do, we'll give you the same chance we'll give everybody else. So.
And to your point, the NBA has definitely been very progressive, especially compared to the other American professional sports leagues. We look at the social activism over the last few months in the light of the deaths of George Floyd and Taylor. For you as a journalist, how have you had to maybe adapt your style of reporting when you've seen that the players have kind of taken a stand and done something that we haven't seen in years?
Yeah, I was really impressed with everything that happened. It's funny, the Minnesota Timberwolves became the epicenter of these two horrible things that were going on in our country, the pandemic and, of course, the social justice. And here's poor Karl Anthony Towns, who lost 7 family members, including his mom, who was really a huge part of the culture of that team. And she was everybody's mom. And then, you have these young Black players who George Floyd is killed in their city, for in some cases, just minutes from where they live downtown. So like Josh Okogie, to me, who's not a household name at all, gosh, I was so impressed with the way he took that mantle and made it, his feeling was, this does not represent Minnesota. This does not represent our team. And he galvanized the team. And Karl Anthony Towns, through his grief, did the same. So you learn a lot about guys in those situations. And I was really, really impressed by what they did. I was impressed by the stand that the Milwaukee Bucks took as well. And of course, LeBron James, I have my ups and downs with him, but he's been a beacon for social justice from almost the very beginning of his career. He uses his influence in very positive ways.
And throughout the years, along with the protests that we saw, a lot of athletes have taken control of not just the way that they're perceived in the media, but the way that they put out their own media, so to speak,
right,
with social media. Do you see social media as a threat to journalism in any way?
I think what's happened is a lot of players are trying to recreate their own brand. And again, I'll point to LeBron James with his own company, Uninterrupted. They've done a fantastic job. That's a frontline, first-rate production company, and they've produced some really, really meaningful things. I think that's the model that some of these other players are using, and I don't find their content, frankly, to be as compelling. And the Players Tribune has had a good run because they've been able to break stories. Players go there to tell their story in their own words, and it's really changed the game a little bit. But I would still argue that we journalists still tell these athletes' stories the best, because that's what we do for a living. And I don't think people want a whitewash version of any of these athletes. I think they want to know their whole story, warts and all. And I think we still can do that the best as a collective unit. And sometimes athletes agree with me when I say that. Sometimes they don't. I think that the ones that I find, maybe I don't like to use the word threat, but a competition to us. And I tease Matt Barnes about this all the time because I'm on the jump with Matt Barnes occasionally. He's got that great podcast, Up in Smoke, and they get everybody, and they have access that I'll never have, that none of us as journalists will ever have. And I feel like every time it's become must listen to me, because it feels to me like they break stories every time they have a guest on. And I commend Matt Barnes for the job he's doing with that.
That's a really good point. I've noticed on All the Smoke, they'll come in and just be relaxed and because they
All the Smoke. Yeah, I called it Up in Smoke, didn't I? All the Smoke. Yeah. Yeah. God, get it right. But yeah, they're tremendous. I mean, Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving made news on there. Steph Curry made news on there. Everybody that goes on, and they ask good questions. Matt's sharp. They've done a good job.
They might take our jobs, for real.
Yeah, let's hope not, but
for sure,
possible.
Sure. But over the years, you've seen many different eras of basketball. The game itself has changed. What have you seen as a recurring theme, though, throughout all of it?
Well, athletes are still people, and we forget that sometimes because they make so much money, and sometimes they seem superhuman. I thought it was really interesting. Paul George's struggles were well documented in the bubble, and the struggles of the Clippers. I mean, he was really awful. And at one point was talking about the challenges of being in the bubble and how his mental health had suffered. And I just thought it was, I've written a lot about mental health, and I was really glad that he was willing to share that. I think he got derided for it, which is too bad, because to me, a mental health issue is the same thing as a sprained ankle or a bad knee. And so as players become more willing to talk about that, I think it humanizes them. And I think it's just like one of the things that blew me away was, so the Lakers win the championship, and people were just dogging Kyle Kuzma on social media and online, saying like he shouldn't get a ring. I mean, the kid is, I don't know how old he is, 23, 24 years old. We don't know what Kyle Kuzma is going to become as a player. And just to have that kind of negativity, surrounding you, I really find social media to be a real toxic wasteland, to be honest.
And to that point, the story that you did on mental health, it goes to show people forget they are human beings. Yes, you may be very passionate about your team, but at the end of the day, I think there's a level of criticizing someone versus just straight out being disrespectful and really hurtful.
I agree, Kwani. I think that's it. I think, in social media, it's anonymous, right? You can go after whoever you want, and you could say whatever you want. And I think it's toxic. And I think we should all, I remember when I was younger and I was frustrated with certain things, My boss, Don Scar, said to me, if you're mad and you send an email back, he said, if it's one of those ones that's really biting, wait 24 hours. Wake up the next morning and see if you still want to send it. Great advice, because I'll tell you, 8 times out of 10, you don't send it. The problem with social media is it's instantaneous. You're mad, you're watching the game, you're throwing stuff at your TV, and you start, ripping away on somebody. And it's spur of the moment, and it's emotional, and it's harmful.
Right. And the moment you send it, it lives online forever, whether you do.
Oh, it does, which is why I'm not on social media.
Exactly. You've been very adamant about it. I really do admire that.
Well, I have a temper, so I know myself. I'm trying to protect me from me.
Right. One thing that I'm sure you've heard be asked to you multiple times is, how have you been able to balance being a mother, but also a journalist? What has that journey been like for you?
Well, it's a lot easier now that my kids are grown. I can't believe how much free time I have. It was pretty difficult when they were young, and I think a lot of that was self-imposed, especially when I was on the Celtics and the NBA beat. I wanted to prove to everybody I belonged there and that I could handle it. And so at the same time, I didn't want to shortchange my children. And, the one benefit of our business is we do have sort of an odd schedule. We work some nights and some days. So, there were some, when I had a game, I would keep my kids home, not from school, but when they were younger, I had them in a home daycare situation. But on the days that I was working nights, I'd have them home. I'd hang out with them. I'd get to spend time with them. But whenever you do that, now you're juggling. Did I do enough for the job today? But I really always felt in the end, and I tell this to young moms in our industry all the time, the job will always be there and your kids will not. And your kids grow up. And you can't get it back. You can always get the job back. And, when I worked at the Globe, I took 2 years off. I went to Sports Illustrated, and then I took 2 years off after that. My kids were young, and I felt they needed my attention, and I went back. I went from the Globe to SI, left SI, took a couple years off, went back to the Globe. And then I did it again when my daughter was in college and my son was in high school, and they were both playing sports and both very involved in things. And if I wanted to go watch my daughter play, it was a 2-hour drive, and I wanted to be able to do that. So, and each time, did it cost me financially? Yep, it did a little bit. Did it cost me in terms of my career growth? It did, probably, but I'm good with it. I'm happy where I am today. And, did I give up some things along the way? Yes, I did. But you know what, Kwani, I can't even remember what they are. And I got to watch my kids grow up. So.
I love that. What has kept you grounded over your career, throughout your career?
Oh, my family. Are you kidding me? I mean, they are so tired of me. And, if someone, the big joke in my house is that I'm marginally famous. That's what we say. And so we'll be out somewhere and, people will recognize you or whatever. Once I remember we were going to a Celtics game with some friends, and my kids and I, we were on the subway. We'd parked our car and taken the subway in, and this guy's like, oh my gosh, you take the subway. And we're all like, so every once in a while, my kids just will look at me and they'll go, oh my gosh, you take the subway. So they have a lot of fun at my expense. And, they're very easy. I don't get away with anything in my house between my husband and my kids. And I wouldn't want it any other way. I mean, in my town, I don't go by the name MacMullan. I go by my married name. That was a conscious decision for my kids and for me in this community. I don't want to be Jackie MacMullan in my community. I want to be my kid's mom. So
I love that. And that actually was the question I was going to ask you. A lot of times people will identify themselves solely as, I work for this place, or I cover this team. So stripping journalism aside, how would you identify yourself?
Oh, wow. I don't know. I do think I'm a family person first. I feel like I've certainly lived up to that. I hope my kids feel that way. I think they do. I did miss my daughter. It was in a play in kindergarten at Halloween. She was a pumpkin and I missed it. And my neighbor, my friend, took a picture of it. And we, I have 10 million photo books. And Allie would say, oh, remember, Mom, that's the one you didn't go to. So that's what I mean by them, twisting the needle. I mean, my son for a while was in plays, and I remember I flew home from New York to go to his play and then flew back again, on my own dime. But those decisions were easy. I wouldn't change those for anything. So I guess I identify first as a mom and a wife, I think. But that's not to say that I'm not invested in my career. I am. It's important to me. I spent a lot of years working to try to become a good writer, something that did not come naturally to me, something I've worked pretty hard at, tried to become a good reporter, and, tried to be someone that can pass it on to some of the other young people in the industry, something that I loved when I was at the Globe, my second tour of the Globe. I was an associate editor, and I was working with young whippersnappers like Michael Smith and Michael Hawley and Michael Reese, the three Mikes. And really enjoyed Field Yates when I was at ESPN, when he was, just starting out. Now he's just a rock star. I'm so proud of him. So it's been fun to watch some of those young people go on to be as successful as they have been.
Final question. I'm sure the basketball fans that are watching will love to hear what storylines you think they should keep their eye on this season.
Well, how about James Harden? He looked like the man that ate James Harden. My goodness.
Quarantine me.
Yeah. Right? Wow. So, I mean, that's an ongoing story. I am curious about the Sixers. That's why I'm writing about them. They looked really energized to me last night about Boston when I looked at Boston. The Celtics are an interesting team. Obviously the overriding storyline there is Kemba, and you hope that he can be healthy, and you hope that this, injection worked in his knee, because he's such a breath of fresh air. He's such a professional. I can't say enough wonderful things about him, and the way he turned everything around for them in terms of their culture and their vibe. And so I think really it's very important for the Celtics, if they want to be successful, to have a healthy Kemba Walker. I think the Clippers, I'm curious to see. I think Serge Ibaka is a really, really big help to them, bigger than people understand, for a lot of reasons, both on and off the floor. So let's see if Paul George means it this time when he says, I want to stay here forever. He's forced himself way out of Indiana. He forced his way out of OKC. If Kawhi Leonard doesn't re-up with the Clippers, does he force his way out of there? So, it's going to be a really fun year. Luka Doncic, he's headed for an MVP year. And my favorite team, the Denver Nuggets, I think they're going to have a great year. And I can't wait to see, can Michael Porter Jr. make that huge next step that we're all sort of watching and wondering about? Because, my goodness, the talent is very obvious.
Thank you so much, Jackie MacMullan, for joining me today.
Thanks, Kwani. It was fun.
This was really fun. Let's do it again.
Merry Christmas and Happy Hanukkah and happy holidays to everybody.